Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Kenny McMahon, and I'm one of the research directors here at Insights Now, so super happy to be with you today. And I also have
Yep.
Greg Stuckey here with me. He's our Chief Research Officer at Insights Now. He's joining us from Italy, so it's nice and comfortable where he's at,
Yes,
so
right.
super jealous. But we appreciate the opportunity to continue our webinar series and dig deeper into a key approach that we believe can really help provide some valuable insights for your research strategy and projects. So just a couple housekeeping things before we begin. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to type them into the question box in the webinar panel. Either Greg or I will monitor the question box during the presentation, so feel free to ask any questions. But with all of our webinars, we are recording the session and we'll be sending out a link to the recording in the next few days to everyone that was registered. So it's archived. So let's go ahead and get started in our webinar on insightful ways to incorporate online research communities into research strategies. We will define, explore, and detail several different research strategies that best leverage the communities to deliver insights to give you a competitive edge in the marketplace. But first, what about social communities? So I'd like to set some context though, because I think the global pandemic boosted connectivity in so many ways. And we've seen a lot of communities either lag or grow in this time period. I think one example, and I'm actually wearing my Apple Watch today and with a Nike Run app, and I think Nike's a good example with their ecosystem. And it was super great, especially during the 9 months of the year that Seattle was super gloomy. But what was interesting during that time period is that the Nike research team, or the NRT, posted a research study in their app to its community of users. So once I signed up, I was sent some product to wear while running and using the Nike Run app. And I thought it was super cool. And so what Nike was able to do and build was this community of users that they could regularly tap into with their research team on the back end. And in addition, what I thought was super interesting over the past weekend, I was able to be incentivized by using that app. And so when I was in one of their brick and mortar stores, I went and bought a new pair of basketball shoes. And by just paying with the app and using it in that study, I got a 15% off specifically tailored product that they were only offering in that Seattle store. So I thought it was super cool. One thing to point out is that with all the Nike apps and as a user, you have access to the data, but Nike ultimately owns that data. So I thought it's super interesting to highlight a couple of these things because as we go through this webinar on how to establish and grow this community, provide creative outlets, or how to incentivize, it's something we'll touch on today. So what we're going to detail is that communities are such a vital part of the research and innovation process. And a lot of people are focused on the commercial side, as in the case of Nike, but they're not fully aware of the breadth of the applications of communities. So we want to highlight a few of those ways on how to leverage them. And so that leads me into what is actually a community. So we're defining an online community as one that serves together a group of consumers or users who have willingly opted into engage in research activities, including both quantitative and qualitative studies on an ongoing basis. So I'd like to start with a poll and learn how you are leveraging online communities. So I just opened the poll, so you should see it pop up. And there's a few selections. Are you using it for qualitative, quantitative, hybrid, none of the above? All right, so we're starting to see some of the answers come in.
Yeah.
It's a little split. Yep. Oh. I
All right,
think
nice.
we got it. Almost
Yeah,
everybody.
pretty much.
All right, let's see. Let's share it. So we have 25%
Yeah.
that are using it as a one-off qualitative approach, 63 using it as an ongoing basis, doing some periodic touch points. Nobody's just using it for solely quantitative, a little bit of hybrid. So that's super interesting. because as we might bucket these as methods to use in a community, these are a lot of the activities that we might present and leverage with using our community of users. So let's dive into how we might bucket the types of communities and when and how to use them. So I'll hide the poll. All right. So as Greg and I were coming through the market from our history of building communities for other research, we narrowed the types down to 4, and they all depend on the type of relationship you want as a researcher and how active you want to be. So on the y-axis, we have how hands-on, how many touch points you want, whether you want to be very involved or not as involved. And then on the x-axis, we have extensibility. So how flexible is the community to other research categories and or business functions? So the first one is high hands-on, yet low value or extensibility. So this type of panel is highly targeted, having a niche community, so it's low in extensibility and its application beyond the target population or brand. So the cost of such a panel is also reasonably expensive. So you see a lot of dollar signs. And because it is targeted, it is expensive to recruit them and establish and maintain it. So this type of community is good for brand user panels. So I liken this type back to the Nike Run app. This community was built to be looking at Nike Run users. And it wasn't really transferable to say their Air Jordan line or Converse line in their portfolio. So it's specific to the brand user panels. On the other side, you have high hands-on or high touch and high extensibility. So you as a researcher still put in the time and effort to run the community, you're maintaining it, you're looking at that from your time and money perspective. So it ups the cost a little bit from your perspective. But as a company, you also own this community and data. So it might be super large and broad, and that size and frequency of touch does increase the price point a bit as well. So where this might be advantageous or used is in market expansion, looking at category behavior because it is very extensible. So it has a broad reach in terms of the categories that could be used. We also could use this for trend spotting or category appraisals to really identify that white space when doing your research and innovation within that process or strategy. So I'll hand it off to Greg to talk about a couple of the others.
All right, thanks. So we've got the next one we're going to talk about is the low hands-on. This is where you as researcher don't have a lot of time to be in and managing a community, being the one asking questions, engaging in it. So you're really looking for building a community where you need a support team to be doing things for you. So there's a couple different ways those get built. One of those is you can just hire a company to do everything end to end. You still own all the data, you still do everything. That ends up being really expensive. What we're seeing in the industry now is a huge movement towards what we call shared communities. And this is where the community is managed by an independent group, and you just get to tap into that community as needed. As you have specific tasks, or if you have some longitudinal piece you want to run, you're just taking a piece and part of that. And so it keeps the cost down because lots of companies are touching that. Lots of different researchers are touching that community. But the first version of that is the low extensibility. These are highly targeted groups of people, and so there tend to be panels communities that are highly focused. And like at Insights now, we have a clean label enthusiast community. That community is just people who are really passionate about clean label products and looking at ingredients and products. That community works. If you're focused on that type of area and building a product in that space, fantastic. But if you're trying to build something outside that space, that community isn't going to be very valuable. So it doesn't extend very far. It stays within its very focused area. So it's really good if you're playing in that area and you want to do brand work, repositioning, if you're doing category trade-off work or targeting specific groups of people. The next type of community is a low hands-on, again, where you're trying to not to do as much hands-on yourself, but you want high extensibility. In this scenario, this is more of a community where the group of people have been recruited to be valuable in lots of different areas. And what these communities have as a core piece of value is that all the people that are involved in these communities are people that are being selected to stay engaged, right? So the community gives you a lot of rich, deep information as well. So at Insights Now, we've got a community we call our primary shopper category advisors. And these are people that have been pre-screened to be in specific category areas. So we know, like myself, I buy in lots of different food and beverage and personal care and fashion categories. And knowing all those categories where I'm passionate allows me as a researcher, if I'm to tap into that specific type of person for that work. So you get high extensibility because you can tap into them for a lot of different things. And then that keeps your costs down because you have a very hands-off approach, but then high extensibility where you want to get moving through lots of different applications or lots of different product categories or lots of different brands in different areas for a business. So two really great ways to build communities that are hands-off, are either highly targeted or then very general. So overall, you've got the high hands-on, low extensibility, very targeted. That's really great when you're focused on a very specific brand value proposition. You've got the highly extensible version of that same thing where you want to build a team that you can really take advantage of a very fast turnaround research program. And then you have the low extensibility where you're trying to keep your costs down and you want either highly targeted groups that you're willing to share or that people are publishing against, and or groups that are highly extensible so that you can just tap into them again very quickly to get deeper, richer insights.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so we talked about, with the poll, there's a lot of activities that we can present and leverage to drive value from the community. And so one of the first activities that we want to talk about, because there's a number of them and different approaches, is an online discussion. It offers a forum for the community of participants to interactively share their feedback and thoughts about a product or service, and whether that can be private between you and the moderator or you and the user, or it can be community member to community member so that there can be some banter. And so those discussions ensure that you understand the why behind the consumer actions, not just the actions themselves. And so another similar activity includes a survey, and those can differ in the form of a question of the day survey, check all that apply, a grid, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a multitude of ways to present a quantitative survey, or just another way is a poll. We did that today. And so it's very easy, and you can do this early on in the conversation. So both surveys and polls are a really quick way to get some read from your community and put some numbers behind some of your questions and research objectives.
Yeah, and a lot of times we're jumping from polls into discussions, right? So you may throw up a survey or a topic area, and then after everybody has responded, they jump into a discussion session about it. And so you get that 1-2 hybrid style design.
Great point.
Another one is actually doing product trial work, right? So you can be sending product to people as long as you've built a community that is planning on and ready to accept product. So our category advisors, as an example, we set them up when we recruited that group. We recruited people who were in specific geolocations so that we knew we had courier services to get them product right to their front door instead of having to use UPS or anybody else. Because if you wanted to put, say, a frozen product in their hand, you got to get it straight from the store to the person. You got to courier it to them. You can't just, have them get something in the mail, if you will. So there's different types of groups that you can set up. You can do different builds for your community based on the types of activities. So in-home product trial work, you can certainly longitudinally see how people use a product either one time or over time, and then you can have them chat about it, share their experiences. You can join in the discussion with them, or you can have it be moderated as well. So they can diary that whole entire process out, and they can put you can get them to do different types of activities, such as, here's some product, I want you to host a party and get people's opinions from the entire party and get that fully contextualized research done as well. So a lot of the value in communities is also in these activities that we give people to do, and different types of communities are going to value different types of activities. The more you nurture people along, the more excited they're going to be to stay a member of the community, and the more information and insights you're going to be able to see.
Yeah, and one build on that is just the behavioral insights, because some of those cues might be verbal, some of them might be nonverbal. So depending on the activity that you're presenting to your community, I mean, it will help answer your research question objective depending on what approach you do take. So another aspect in terms of setting up these communities is on community management and engagement. And it's super important for the latter, the engagement. And so this covers all facets of the community lifecycle. And so from a community management standpoint, it can be very helpful to have someone there to start up the community and establish the community by introducing the user to the platform and uploading their information. Managers are also helpful with the technical support. And so they help the consumer as well as the stakeholders of your teams in training them on how to use the platform with whatever choice you may have. And that helps the subsequent navigation once a community goes live. And so once live, managers are super clutch for the research support. Whether it's sending messages in the chat that Greg was mentioning, helping to upload the diary from a consumer, responding to discussion posts or messages, or just quality control in the questionnaire or survey development. And so that's really key to ensure that the community stays engaged and is happy, and we're answering the questions or concerns along the way. And last and certainly not least, it's really to help keep that engagement up is with creative activities. We just mentioned it. It really helps them to stay active and want to come back for more discussion and keep that banter alive.
Now, there's a couple of ways to incentivize a community, and one of the things to think about is when we're working with communities, whether you're going to be hands-on or hands light, if you will, is how the community has been incentivized. And there's really two primary ways that communities are incentivized today. The first is with an actual incentive, and that could be in the form of money, it could be in the form of specific product. It could be in the form of volunteer donations, et cetera, but it's going to be a specific incentive to get done. So they're getting something. The second area, and that's, by the way, like our category advisors, that's what their passion, they love testing out new products. And so getting those new products is the incentive that they dearly love. There's monetary incentive behind it as well, but it's really that desire to get that stuff and interact with the new. The second is a passion-oriented community, and that's more like our clean label enthusiasts. These people are super passionate about clean products, sustainability, all these types of topics. They are in there regularly talking to each other about what's going on within these spaces. If we post a topic about a news article comes out, everybody's all over it. They're talking, it doesn't matter how much money you do or don't give them, they're ready to give their opinion because it's their personal passion. And so you can set up communities that are either incentivized or primarily people are there because of the incentives they're getting, or you can set up communities where people are primarily there because of the passions that they have. And you can think about this. Remember the grid, most of the passion-oriented communities are going to fall on that low extensibility side. They're going to be people who are very focused in a very specific area. And so most of the passion-oriented communities are going to be your in that low extensibility side.
Yeah, I have an interesting example that during the pandemic and the lockdown, a friend of mine texted me and was like, "Hey, Lenovo's putting on a session or a group that they're recruiting for. They're looking for 50 people to join." I'm like, "Oh, what's it about?" He's like, "Oh, webcams." Like, I'm not passionate about webcams. And he's like, "Well, no, the benefit is we get 6 beers from this microbrewery that they're teaming up with." And I'm like, yeah, I'll join and talk about that. So the incentive for me was, a social one to learn and like interact with the technology over a conversation on a beer. So, having Lenovo seek out passionate people on webcams would have been super expensive. Been hard to find. The incidence would have been low in terms of setting up that community. But they were smart in terms of incentivizing their target in terms of finding and using the technology in a way that engaged them socially. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That's great. Good example. Yeah, sometimes really passionate community people are really expensive to get a hold of. So you're right. You may want to set up one thing, but may realize you need to. Plus, you may also have a brand that really isn't a passion-oriented brand, or a category that isn't a passion-oriented category. So sometimes you can leverage a couple of these together in a creative way to drive that incentive forward. Yeah, it's good. A good
Exactly.
example. Love that.
So another thing about communities is replenishment. And so, it's a good practice to review your community and on a routine basis, quarterly, monthly. It depends on the longevity and how many touch points you're doing, to ensure that everybody's happy, they're staying, and there's low attrition. And so that's where it gets into the next point. Not everyone sticks around. Especially if it is a high touch point, you might need, in thinking about that grid, you might need a really large community to ensure that there's no fatigue when you're engaging them. So to minimize the risk of attrition. And so that's where they can be overused. So we talked about a lot of creative engagement, a lot of activities. And so in terms of stimulating those organic responses, coming up with activities or hybrid approaches will be really important in terms of maintaining that engagement, and just the passion towards the topics that are at hand. So there's a couple of those ways just for maintenance purposes, so that as you're looking at communities, you're not replenishing them more often than not.
Yeah. Yeah, part of the value of keeping communities engaged is what keeps costs down as well. The higher your replenishment rate, the higher your costs.
Yeah, yeah. So one other piece is data management. I won't go exhaustively here because there's a lot of ways to organize the data, but we know that data is everything as researchers in the community. So at the end of the day, who owns what, and the accessibility depends on those 4 types. If you are looking at a high touch, larger community, it might be better to train and grant access to a lot of the stakeholders so that they have ready access to that data. And so as you're developing that story, you can do that cross-functionally and do it together. As if it's a low touch, it might just be a simple summary report that's a templatized version of the data output. So it just depends on how you're digesting that material. And so one way is on dashboards. They're a really good enabler for digesting the data and sorting it depending on if it's a large piece, and how many touch points you're doing and how live that data is coming in versus a low touch point, small community, and whether that's just a report. So dashboards are one good way to visualize the story as a researcher. So I'll hand it off back to Greg.
All right, so let's talk about really why we would want to do communities or build communities or engage with communities in terms of our research. First of all, the value of an online community really stems from a focus on behavior, because you get the same people over time. You get to see their behavior as it changes over time. You get to interact and see how their opinions and their activities change over time as well. So you can certainly have behavioral tracking, both quantitative behavioral tracking, but also attitudinal, social, qualitative. Most of the people here were using them for qualitative. So you get that behavioral piece, and then you get the added layer of the social learning within that. You get to socially listen, not just from the vantage point of social media, where like in social media research, you get little tiny snippets from people you don't know. Here, you get really deep social learning to see how people interact with each other, how they convince each other of certain personal opinions, to try products, not try products, how they discuss things when they have tried similar products, et cetera, so forth. So you get this social learning, and that drives you to be a creative enabler, essentially, within this. So you can use your community to drive that agile creative process forward. You can really quickly answer questions. You can engage with people. If you work specifically with a high touch community where it's your group of people and you're working with them all the time, you get to know them pretty quickly, and allows for nice cross-functional, consumer-centric ideation and decision making, which gives you lots of speed and lots of confidence in your information, because you know the information, you know the people, and you can get it up and launched quickly. The other nice thing about communities is it's really nice way to set up templates to drive speed. So if you have a certain style of activity or types of questions that you want to ask on a regular basis, they get really used to that, and so they stop having like that tech support need all the time, because they get really good and they'll turn around those activities quite quickly for you. All right, then the next area is the business benefits themselves. One of the biggest things with communities essentially is there's a lack of red tape. Communities, you typically build or pay your way in, if you will, to a community. So you essentially have prepaid access, which means every time you want to run a research project, you don't have to fill out all the paperwork, put the PO in, get it signed by 12 people, and wait 2 weeks to get it done. So this prepaid access really helps you as a business streamline your team, streamline other research to get it done more quickly, be more nimble, be more agile, which really is the next piece: smaller, faster, more agile research. Communities let you keep things tight and quick. Even quantitative research, which not very many people were doing, it was a 0% on our list there, but a little bit of hybrid, but the quant only, really, that can be a useful way to get quick information. So you can get really quick touch points with communities and trust the data because you know some of the background of the people in those communities. Also, being able to have steady access to socially relevant ideas. You can constantly be posting information, listening in on that community, so you're constantly engaged. Even in the really low touch versions, in those bottom two that I talked about, whoever's owning that community, like Insights Now, our clean label enthusiast community, we're publishing information from them. Even though you might not own all of the data from a community like that's shared like that, you still have the owner putting out all this information all the time so that you're staying relevant in certain topic areas. Also, broad availability for lots of business units and business teams. So depending on how you set this up within your organization, usually it's pretty extensible across different divisions of the organization. So marketing can use it, research can use it, R&D can use it, et cetera, so forth. And that gives you a lot of value for keeping people engaged and going within the activity. And then finally, it's all about longitudinal behavioral learnings. So you get to see things happen over time, and you can start tracking those things over time and see what things are changing. With our clean label enthusiasts, we were tracking their COVID-oriented behaviors as we been going through this last couple of years, and it's been really eye-opening to be able to see how their behaviors are changing as it related to things like sustainability. Opinions changed. A necessity forced them into habits and behaviors that they didn't want to have, and it's really interesting when you've got a good community, you can follow that type of behavior along really easily. All right, and then sorry, did you have something to add?
Nope.
Okay.
Very good.
And then Some considerations then to help you maximize your value. Remember that this is not like communities are not a one size fits all type of approach, right? You need to think through what are the types of things I want to be able to do with this community, and then build it in a complementary fashion. Okay. Second, think about the target and why they're participating. Like we talked about incentivizing, whether it's passion oriented, what is really engaging them? Is there a social construct that you need to put in? Then it's actually that social discussion that you're most interested in. If that's what drives them, you got to make sure that when you're recruiting people, you're recruiting people that like to talk and like to get to know other people. So think through what activities you're doing, who the target is, and really what their reason for participating is. Make sure you've set up a really good set of expectations around frequency of touch points with them. We've got a community that we only engage with once a month, and they stay around. You just have to set them up that, hey, by the way, on the third Friday of every month, you're going to get an engagement, and let's all get together and talk about it. Or, it's going to happen once a month, and you have 3 days to complete it, whatever it is. But you can set it up any way you want, but if you set the expectations right, you're going to get good maintenance of that panel. You're going to get good participation. The topical focus. Really make sure that as you're thinking through what you're going to be working, how you're going to be engaging that community with activities, make sure you're always talking to them about what topical value they're bringing, right? They're there because they see an incentive or a passion, but you've got to be able to communicate back to them their own value as well. And part of that is the topics that they discuss, being able to understand what topics they're going to discuss, as well as then making sure that they get communicated back that their discussion is helping further that topic along, right? Further research on that area, further new products, new brands in that particular area. Right. And then the final piece is management. Just make sure you thought through how are you going to manage the community. If you've got poor management, people are going to exit within a few months of being asked to participate. So think through the community management. If you have lots of time or you have a team to do it, great, go hands-on. If you don't have that time and available to you, find a shared community, find a way to get it managed externally so that you can keep those people involved. Also, from the management standpoint, one of the things that you can do is think up management activities months and months and months in advance. So if you can set down even at the beginning of a quarter, beginning of a half year, and think through what are the core things we're going to do in the next 6 months. Let's make sure that those are there so that the engagement is there, and then as agile pieces come up, you can jump those in.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of these considerations are really important because you're trying to leverage the feedback and responses from your most valuable asset, and that's your customer or your consumer. And so a lot of these are laddering up to each other, and they'll help build a really strong community in the end. And whether it is a high touch or high extensibility or low touch, low extensibility, a lot of these do transcend each of those 4 types, and to really help get closer to the consumer and uncover those behavioral insights. So, we want to thank you for the time and attention today, and hopefully leveraging these aspects. So we want to open it up for any questions in that question box, and I don't know if we've seen any come through just yet, but
all right, questions.
So we see, can you tell us more about your category advisors community? I'm curious about how it's constructed and how you use it.
Sure. So category advisors community, this community was set up originally to be a product experience community. So what we wanted to have was a group of people who would be really good at doing home use or in-home product trial work, looking at products, whether it be in-market products already or whether it be prototype products. But we wanted them to be excited about testing products, giving us really good feedback on products. We also wanted them to be available for accepting things like frozen products and other types of products, especially during COVID times. You wanted to really take care of what you were putting in their hands. So all of these people, we have this community is actually built. We got a West Coast group, a Midwest group, and an East Coast group, and they're all centered in a location where we have courier services that can drive product to their homes. So we use them a lot from a product trial standpoint. And it's more like think of a typical home use trial project. If you have enough sample, you can send out 100 products. We'll spread them out as appropriate, depending on what the need is, and then have people answer a questionnaire, do video, do walkthroughs. The value here is that it's a community, so then they can, if you want to add a lot of the discussion sessions afterwards, you can add the discussion pieces in addition to that. What's great about this group is that they're already pre-screened into specific categories. So if you want to test a pasta sauce, if you want to test a candy bar, if you want to test soda, we already know every single person's categories that they buy regularly and are frequent purchasers of. So they're already essentially pre-screened. We just have to go select them and say, hey, this project's starting on this day. Are you going to be available during those 3 days to use the product? Yes, boom, they get the product. So it's really speeds up that process because we already know who they all are. We also have an interface for that. You can actually go on our website. We have a Insights Now Innovation Center. You can go down to the testing center part of that, and you can actually fill out a form right there to say, this is how many people I want. This is the types of products I'm testing, types of questions I want. It's got instant quoting, so you can see exactly how much it costs based on the type of design that you're interested in. Or you can call us, folks like Kenny jump in and just walk you right on through that at every step of the way.
And how often are we touching them?
It's a good question. So we try not to touch these people with product trials more than twice a month. We try and keep it around once a month, but no more than twice a month. We don't let anybody have simultaneous projects going on. So we want to keep that from overuse from happening as well. Sometimes they're still involved in other types of just general discussions, if you will, because we often will post topical areas. We've posted a lot of COVID-related topics on there as well that aren't necessarily product specific.
Well, it's keeping them engaged, right? So, bridging that gap and the transitions between one project to the next. So it all goes back to what we were saying as far as the considerations and how we're leveraging them. So
it's true, and it's all over the place. Like we have, our categories span, right? We have a lot of pet work going because we know what kind of pets these people have: cats, dogs, what size, you name it. So a lot of the value in having communities like this, again, is that intimate knowledge of who these people are and the ability to tap into that super quick.
Yeah, and strategically, having New York City, the Midwest, and then the West Coast, they all differ, socioculturally, especially from a pet standpoint. How they're big yard, little studio in New York,
That's right.
so it's super interesting. Any other questions?
That's a good one.
Yeah, that was great.
All right.
Yeah. So, feel free to reach out to either me or Greg. Our emails are in this deck, so you'll get a copy of this. We also have a resource on our website for our innovation center, and so you can find out a lot of information about our communities, our clean label enthusiast community, and just their perceptions around that. So there's a lot of good tools within this that you can find within our innovation center. And our director of the innovation center is Kate Hamilton. So you feel free to reach out to her as well for any of these community needs too.
You bet. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good information there. If you're curious about things that we didn't quite touch on today, just give us a ring. Next month, we're actually going to jump back into some really cool research. It's going to get a little bit more technical on implicit and explicit. We're going to actually look at specific patterns within the implicit and explicit data, and going to uncover there's some patterns that I think we've been noticing that people are overlooking that could be missed huge opportunities for people. So we're going to get into data patterns within implicit and explicit next month and talk about a whole bunch of different really good ones. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar. Look forward to seeing you next month.
All right, have a great afternoon.
Yeah, you too.